So then I guess why podcast? Like why were you interested in, like talking about this story and teaching people on podcasts? Why did that make sense for you?
Because I would like to say I'm ambitiously lazy, right? I like leverage. And the whole reason I actually started a podcast was partly I had a midlife crisis in my 30s, because I thought, well, what if I die when my kids are young with all the things I've learned about money that's so different than what's taught out there? How do I make sure that they learn it if I'm gone? So one, I want to record what I knew. But two, also when I had clients and they'd all ask the same questions, I would get tired of answering it every time. So I would record those frequently asked questions or should be asked questions. I would record that on my podcast. I actually I did a radio show on AM Talk Radio back in like 2007, 2008. But then I liked it so much, I actually decided to do a podcast starting at the end of 2008. Back then it was called Fire Financial Advisor. You'll never find it again. It's gone. It's all the content.
That's what I like to say about my first podcast. Like you can't find it anywhere online, and thank God. But anyway.
Yeah, I know, seriously. I listen to even my own podcast. I'm actually about 800 episodes in my own show. I'm 10th season with my Money Ripples podcast. And even the first episodes of that were pretty embarrassing compared to what I do today. Yeah. But I mean, that's the thing.
I still can't listen to my own podcast like modernly, man. Like I don't know. Like I don't like the sound of my own voice on recording, as weird as that is.
Maybe you do what I do. You put on double speed just so you get through yourself faster. Just you're like, I want to hear it, but I really don't want to hear it. So yeah, I mean, but that's what I did. Like it was really like a way to get out information without. So if somebody had a question, I'm like, oh, here's that question again. Here, listen to this recording. Mm-hmm. Then I don't have to deal with it. Like so, it just frees up my time and my energy. But as time went on, right, especially as I launched my Money Ripples podcast over 10 years ago. I was on a podcast. I know you guys get people on podcasts too, like you've done for me. And I got on this podcast called Entrepreneurs on Fire with John Lee Dumas, right? And I actually co-wrote a book with him and Tim Ferriss. And so that's how I got that connection. And I got on his show and man, like I remember seeing the stats on my website blew up after being on that show. And it started to hit me. I was like, wait a minute, this right here, maybe this is more than just trying to give something to my kids and or free up my time with my own clients. Maybe this is something that can go to the general public. And especially when your message really becomes a mission where you really like, I'm fighting really the traditional financial mindset out there today to liberate people away from that crap. Right. And so the best way to do that, in my opinion, was to leverage my strengths. And I know that for me, it was my voice, right? Mm-hmm. Using my voice to teach and to help spread that message, essentially create the ripple effect, like my name of the company, Money Ripples, create that ripple effect to bless more lives. And really podcasting is just one of the best ways to do it. And even better, you can get on other people's shows. And this is the secret I learned, right? I get on other people's shows. Why? Not to pitch my stuff, not to sell people, but to really, if not touch them in their hearts, at least help inspire them to the point where they say, I want to learn more. And I don't just refer them to buy something. In fact, I never do that. What I do instead is I refer them to listen to my podcast. Because if they're already listening to podcasts, why not get them to listen to yours too? And so by getting them to listen to my podcast, I increase my followers. And I'll tell you, almost all my clients, if you ask them, when we do ask them, how did you find us? They'll say, your podcast. But first, I heard you on this podcast and I started following your podcast. And then I knew at that point, I wanted to hire you guys. And that's how we came in.
You know what's really interesting too, because you described that, and like as a host, and even as a listener, like I think of myself like how I found all my favorite podcasts. It's usually like one of my friends told me about it, so I went and checked it out, or I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about another podcast. So like it's very interesting, like how people discover podcasts. Like I don't think I've ever found one from like, oh, look at this ad for this podcast, or look at this campaign for this podcast. It was more of like user experience, which is it's really interesting because I think at the same time, like that recommendation also affects how people receive the data.
It does. Yeah. It's that leaded credibility, right? When you're on somebody else's show, you automatically become the expert. And so especially when you're starting out, this is essential. If you're trying to really make a name for yourself, the best thing to do is to get featured. I mean, even my own bio, the funny thing is as I get, almost like more and more trophies of podcasts I've been on, I can add those to my bio, right? Like Entrepreneurs on Fire. I've been on that show 3 times. I throw that in my bio. In the real estate space, Bigger Pockets is popular. I was featured on Bigger Pockets magazine in one of their little side shoot, shows. So I throw that in there for the very reason to add that credibility on my bio. but also just because it gives you more experience of teaching too. Like the better you can teach, the better you can touch people and give them value, the more that they want to keep following you. And that creates, again, I keep using the word ripple effect, but it really does. It creates that ripple effect to know that you're able to not just get better at speaking, not just get better at doing these interviews, but most importantly, really getting better in how to deliver value in a way that gets people to take action. And when they take action, they get results, assuming that what you teach is good, right? You take action, they get results, good results preferably. And then as a result, that starts to build a reputation and credibility that goes beyond you. And then this is what happens. You start to create a brand. And when you create a brand that speaks for itself, that's when you don't have to keep selling as hard anymore. Now you don't have to keep trying to convince people to work with you. Now they want to work with you even before you talk to them.